A very pleasant good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk. We are delighted that you have joined us, those of you who are on our social media platforms, SLC Adventist, SLC Church Channel, and for those of you who may be listening via Second Advent Radio. Wherever you are around the world, welcome to Let's Talk. We are so happy that you have joined us today because today we have a very special edition of Let's Talk. This week we are, in fact, today marks the culmination, or should I say the beginning of the culmination, the beginning of the final week of activities of celebrating 90 years of Adventist education in Antigua Barbuda. And because of that, we are focusing this afternoon on Adventist education. And I have in studio a very distinguished panel. We have 6 individuals. I will introduce them to you in a little while, but before we do so, we'd like to invite you to bow your heads with us as we have a word of prayer. Eternal Father and our God, we thank you for the privilege and opportunity to come again and to this afternoon discuss Adventist education. We pray for your wisdom and your guidance in Jesus' name. Amen. So welcome again, viewers and listeners. With us this afternoon, we have a very distinguished panel. We have I'm going to say the principals of our various educational institutions and also a historian who will guide us in our discourse as we discuss Adventist education. I'm going to go from nearest to furthest from me. So right up front, we have Mrs. Susana Gore. She is the coordinator of the University of the Southern Caribbean satellite site here in Antigua. Some of you may not have known that Antigua has an extension of the University of the Southern Caribbean. Sister Susana Gore, good afternoon and welcome to Let's Talk.
Good afternoon, sir.
And beside her is the principal of our secondary school. I believe she's no stranger to Let's Talk. She has been on Let's Talk at least once before, I believe twice. So welcome, Mrs. Melecia Campbell-Edwards.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon.
Beside her, we have Mr. Robert Nicholas. Mr. Nicholas is the principal of the Antigua Seventh Adventist Primary School. Good afternoon, Mr. Nicholas, and welcome.
Good afternoon, Doc, and welcome myself and others who are here.
And beside him, we have Mrs. Coreen Patrick. She is the principal of the New Bethel Academy. New Bethel Academy is in the village of Liberta. Good afternoon, Mrs. Patrick, and welcome.
Good afternoon, sir, and it is a pleasure to be here. And
next to her, we have Mrs. Zelphia Daley, who is the coordinator of our Early Childhood Educational Center. We are delighted that she is here with us. You would observe that we cater for every age group in our educational system. Mrs. Daley, good afternoon and welcome.
Good afternoon, Dr. Greene. Good afternoon to our viewing and listening audiences.
And finally, this afternoon, we have Mr. Bertrand Joseph, who is an educator in his own right, but he is on the panel this afternoon as our historian. He's going to guide us, correct us when we make historical errors, and set the record straight. Good afternoon, Elder.
Good afternoon, President Greene. Indeed, it's an honor to be here this afternoon.
All right, so we want to get right into the discussion. Again, for those of you who are viewing on SLC Church Channel or SLC Adventist, you, of course, know that you can always write your questions in the chat, and it would be our delight to respond. I like to say on Let's Talk, 1 hour goes by very quickly. Already, it's ticking away, so we're going to get right into the discussion. So we are today culminating the celebration of, well, starting the last week of the celebrations, the 90th anniversary of Adventist education in Antigua. That, of course, is a significant milestone. 90 years is certainly a lot longer than I have been existing on this earth. And from the looks of my panel, longer than any one of our panelists has been existing either. So the Seventh Adventist Church is a worldwide movement with a heavy emphasis on holistic ministry delivery, which is why we focus not just on academic learning, but we look at total development. We have a lot of emphasis on health because we believe that God wants strong, healthy bodies. We talk about education because, again, intellectual capacity is important. So Adventist education is one aspect. But Elder Joseph, I want to begin with you. Before we get into the specifics of the establishment of Adventist education in Antigua, can you share a bit on the establishment of the church and what it was like in the beginning stages? Because Adventism has not always been in Antigua.
Certainly, Adventism has not always been in Antigua and Barbuda, but we speak, when we speak of Adventism, normally we speak of Seventh-day Adventism, but and which came into Antigua about 1888 through Mrs. Russell. But Adventism has been in Antigua prior to that, the Millerite movement, which came in 1846 and spread from Antigua into areas like Montserrat and Nevis and so forth. For the record, you will recognize that the first native president of the Inter-American Division, Mr. Bender, President Bender, his great aunt was one of the Millerite who came here in 1846 under the title of her husband, Livingston. And but so that's it. That is when you look at some of the names too of that particular movement, you see some of them reappearing in the movement, the Advent movement of 1888. I'm not sure they're the same person, but you see the same titles reappearing. But what I would say is that Miss Russell, to give you some context, Miss Russell is a very strange name because it's an English name. And the original name, maiden name, was Madrick. When you look at the Madricks in Antigua, they came from the merchant class. And sometimes previous historians have gotten her, Mrs. Russell, mixed up with her sister, her younger sister, Florence Pickens. And so in the early literatures of the church, you will see that they say that the founder, or the person who brought Seventh-day Adventism to Antigua was one Mrs. Pickens. Pickens is the name that they use. But really and truly, the name is not Pickens, but Pickens. And when you study the history of estates, where they say she was tied, she was owner of the Fry's estates, which was also false. She was not owner of the Fry's estates, but her husband, Thomas Pickens, was a manager, or what we say in West Indian historical parlance, the attorney, not a lawyer, but a manager of an estate for someone else. He was managing the estate for Fry's. And actually, he used to alternate with one Joseph Pickens. And they will alternate from between the Fry's in the east and the Fry's in the west. And you can search our local newspapers to see that. So the name that we have, and especially in our literature, in our literature, is Mrs. Russell, who was baptized in 1887 in England by Heskell, one of our officers at the General Counsel, at the General Conference, who at that stage was stationed in England. And she brought Adventism to Antigua a year later. And she established the first Sabbath school at St. John's in 1888. Also, shortly thereafter, there was a second Sabbath school which was organized in Old Road. Our early literature would say that the first Sabbath school, or the first company, was established in Johnson's Point. There is no record which would substantiate that. What I can say is that you will see a number of Adventists, the very names that some of them mention, would appear in the records, but they will appear in the early part of the century, in the first maybe 2 decades of the century. If you check, for example, at the records at St. John's, one of the names that is usually mentioned is the name Katrina, and they spell it K with a K. but actually when you check the records, her name is really Catherine. When you look at the record at St. John's, she will be listed there as Kate. And so when we look at the early formation of the church, it arose out of the crusade from Ball, who came from New York in 1890, and then holding a crusade in 1891 for about 3 months. The record is clear with respect to that. And out of that emerged 10 members who formed the original company at St. John's. The youngest was 17 years old, a young lady, last name Skerritt, because I can't remember her first name at this time. She was 17 years old at the time. She was an orphan. And the oldest was 87. And the church grew gradually because there was nobody except Miss Piggins really leading the church at this time. Actually, the records will say that she came to Antigua in 1888, and she had just visited England. But in reality, when I search the records, that is not true. The records will indicate that she got married in England in 1883. And so she was living in England. To further substantiate it, when you look at the records of the General Counsel, it seemed that she was going back to England, and they asked her to remain on the island until they could send a minister to replace her. She remained for 19 years before she returned to England in 1911. And so it was under her leadership, and when the first minister came to the region and was stationed in Barbados, Van Dusen, he came in 1896, and he actually visited Antigua twice, in April of 1896, and then he returned in late around November. And when he returned, 4 additional members were added to the 10. Those members came from the family that was at Old Road. They were not from Old Road. They were actually from the Liberta area. But their father was, at the time, the local minister at the Moravian Church. And he was also the headmaster of the Moravian Church at Old Road. And it was in the manse that he was holding his Sabbath school. And so the first 4 members of that family, famous names, you probably would not recognize them, but with some of them. But I will tell you, one of the daughters, Rachel, opened the first Seventh-day Adventist school in Trinidad. Another one, she died on the field in South Carolina, Agatha. She was born at Mount Williams in Liberta. Then you had Louise, married to one of the first ministers in the Caribbean, actually Philip Giddens. Philip Giddens was from Guyana, but they married at the Anglican Church, which we know as Big Church in Antigua here in 1902. She, along with Florence and Agatha, were some of the first Antiguans to go off to study at Battle Creek. Rachel studied education, and also Agatha. They studied education at Battle Creek. And Louise studied nursing. One of the things you will notice is that the Adventist education was a top-down model. They started first with the universities, a higher form of education, because they wanted to prepare these teachers to make sure that when they get into the classroom, they were well prepared to teach our students. And so you find that a number of Antiguans in the early period went off to study. Mr. Williams from Old Road also went off to study in North America and to work in the southern field.
Now,
so
that's kind of interesting. You're giving us a lot of historical perspective. Some, I have to admit, I'm hearing for the first time, particularly that 1846 connection that you mentioned there. Now, this year, in fact, a short while ago, if I'm not mistaken, it was last week, that the Caribbean Union launched the centennial celebrations. So next year, 2026, the Caribbean Union will be celebrating its 100th year of existence. And so I am planning, I'm making this announcement now, that perhaps sometime around September or thereabout, I want to start a series on Adventist history in the Caribbean Union. And so we're going to have you back to talk a lot more details about particularly Antigua, Trinidad, Guyana, some of those early places, because it would be very interesting to explore that 1846 connection, because we genuinely think about 1888 as Adventism in Antigua. I noticed also that you did not mention anything about William Arnold, which is what I was expecting to hear. So that again is quite some interesting development there.
Yes, I think, well, I would say with respect to William Arnold, although I don't have the records with respect to Mr. Peters, I believe that perhaps he would have touched base with Mr. Arnold. Mr. Arnold would have touched base with him, because by the time himself, William Arnold, and who returned with Ball in 1890, one of the things that he noted that when he returned to Antigua, he found these 2 Sabbath schools. And so we know that basically Ross Roog was working in the town area with people that she was connected with. Her sister, Pickens, would have had contacts. And one of the things our history will show is that Adventism developed early in certain places. And those, interestingly, are places in which Mrs. Pickens had connection. For example, in Freetown, where they lived and managed estate at Comfort Hall. In Willikies, not in Willikies, but in Parham, where an Adventist company was established as early as the 2nd decade. And we see the establishment of the Adventist Church around 1954. But Adventism was in Parham long before that, in the period of Matthew, Minister Matthew, who is the first Antiguan to become an Adventist minister.
Very, very interesting indeed. Now let me get into more of what we are discussing this afternoon, and that is Christian education. The history is really interesting, but we do have today a secondary school, we have 2 primary schools, we have an early childhood development center, and of course we have the University of the Southern Caribbean. And of course I will ask all of these individuals to comment on and give us some perspective as to the role their various institutions play. But can you give us a brief history of the development of Adventist education in Antigua?
But let me say that when the first church was constructed, which is the church at St. John's, one of the things that was catered for was an education department. And you will see that in the literature. So, but when we look at the people who comprised the church at that time, you didn't really have the sort of children there. They were mostly adults, but at least the preparation was made for that. But there would have been challenges, because at the time when the church was established, it was a crisis in education in Antigua and Barbuda. The churches that had already, like the Methodist Church and the Anglican Church and the Moravian Church, which would have established educational institutions, they were having challenges. And so by the time you get to 1914, most of their schools had been passed on to the government. But they maintained some level of operation in the school, but most of those institutions were now being run by the government. And so it was a challenge for those early institutions, never mind the Seventh-day Adventist institution, to be able to establish. I can tell you because in the 80s, when I was working at a certain institution, I was doing the history to celebrate their education in Antigua and Barbuda. And they formed their school around the same time as the Seventh-day Adventist school, 1934. But they were trying to establish a school as early as 1867. And so the Adventists basically was able to do it. And this was an institution that had the resources that the Adventist Church didn't have. But by 1934, they were able to do that. And you see when you read the Inter-American Division Messenger, that there was this increased emphasis and the necessity for us to establish a church school. And when they talked about a church school, they were not talking simply about a church school for the island of Antigua. It was anticipated that each church would have their own church school. Because when you look at the history of the development, not just of Adventism, but we're talking about a long tradition if we are now supposed to be the spiritual Israel. If we go back into biblical times, at one point, the school was attached to the church, to the synagogue. And that is the model that they were talking about. In those days, they were talking about taking children from the age of 5. At a later period, they were talking about 5 or 6, and they had to be connected to that church school. And even though we don't get that idea with respect to how Jesus Christ was educated, when we look at the tradition of what education was in that day and what was the expectation and so forth, that is the model that we try to establish. And we are not just talking about any educational system. In the old biblical tradition, it was based upon the Torah. That is where the educational system was established. When the Adventists came along, it's the Torah. But when we talk about the Torah, we're not talking about the first 5 books or so of the Bible now. We're talking about the Old Testament and the New Testament, which was supposed to form the basis of Christian education. But because of the challenges that they recognized in terms of the lapse and of the educational system and the fact that we had gone through a particular different sort of dispensation, they were now saying that we could not afford to have our children outside of the home until maybe 8 or 10, because there was a great work to do with respect to the spirituality of our young people before we can take them out of the home and entrust them to people. But of course, we are working within the dynamics of nation states, and they're making laws and the whole question of compulsory education starting at the age of 5. And so when we first established that school, it was established on the basis of creating a new system of education in Antigua and Barbuda, predicated on our Christian teaching. And when I see that, Pastor, I don't want to digress too much. I always mention this book when I did intellectual history. And the Americans were confronted with industrialism coming to America. And they're saying, how are you going to deal with these sort of negative social issues that emerge in Europe at the height of the Industrial Revolution? How the Americans are going to deal with that? And the answer was civilizing the machine, making the Republican values dictate how those machines operated. And so it is the same with Christian education. How are you going to be fundamentally different from any educational system? You're going to impose your Christian beliefs on those educational institutions.
Very, very well. So it is a particular philosophy that drove the formation of schools. You know, and you did identify 1834 as the date when the Adventist educational system started in Antigua, 1834. You know, I learned just a few days ago, in fact, that there is still alive today one of the original students from that date. I wanted to show his photo. I did not arrange with our technician, so maybe we can arrange that before the program is finished.
But before you go to this, Pastor, because I talk about, we started with the primary school system, but I just wanted to touch with respect to tertiary education, because I think it was the union, I stand corrected, that had a meeting here in Antigua in 1946. And as early as 1946, they were talking about establishing a satellite of our campus, head campus in Trinidad, establishing a satellite here in Antigua and Barbuda as early as 1946.
Very, very interesting. I'm sure Mrs. Gore will want to comment on that. But before we get into that, let me, I'm going to come back to the first student in a while. I'm not sure though, because time is moving so quickly. It's already 3:30. We only have half an hour remaining. Can you believe it? I don't know who wants to answer this question, but we said that we have preschool, we have secondary school, we have primary school, we have early childhood, and now we have tertiary education. Operating a school is very expensive, costs a lot. So why go through the challenges of having Adventist education? Why, Elder Joseph kind of gave part of the answer already, but somebody may want to add to that. Why Adventist education? Why don't we just say, all this money we're pumping into paying teachers and maintaining buildings, etc. Why not just allow the government to do their thing? Sister Gore, you have the mic.
I love the question. Mm-hmm. Christian education, the real Christian education, is the whole idea of it is to make those children little Christians for God. You can say it with all the big language, but it's just to make them fall in love with the Lord. Your whole curriculum should be Christocentric. So at the end of the day, this child would have a relationship with God. And most of the problems that we face in society, we would not have it. So Christian education is so important, more important than the socioeconomic whole cost-effective thing. So we need to consider that this is very, very important.
Very well. Mr. Nicholas, go ahead.
When we consider as well that the message that we have as Seventh-day Adventists, the three angels' messages in particular, to give to the world, who's going to prepare the children to take that message? The school has to do that. And although we send them off to university and so on, if they get the foundation, I listened to a preacher today, and I felt so proud of him as he presented the message with such clarity and power of the Spirit. Imagine we have 3, 4, 5 more like that to send out into the highways and byways to deliver. That is what we want. And if we don't have that foundation at the school, or a school that is preparing students like that, it's going to be even more difficult to meet the challenges that are there with presenting the gospel. So that's why we need the schools, because we need to prepare those students to be able to take the message that we have to the world.
So a part of our educational system, therefore, is to ensure that our boys and girls have that connection with God, not just to make some money, but to have a connection with God that will fit them and maintain them.
Yeah, Pastor, but if you look at the public education, what is the purpose of public education? Is to create good citizens, law-abiding citizens, and citizens who can produce based upon what the country economic position is. It is not about their spiritual development. It's not about the internal development. It is about the temporal needs of the state and not the eternal destiny of a people.
Yes, Christian education is preparing them for this life and the life to come. So that's where we have the upper hand on them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very well. Now, I went ahead and asked ChatGPT because, those who are listening may say, well, you have all Adventists on the panel, so what do you expect? So I decided to ask ChatGPT about the benefits of Adventist education. Now, ChatGPT is not Adventist, it's very secular, in fact. And it's amazing that ChatGPT says, in fact, it gives a very extensive list of benefits. It talks about focusing on spiritual things. It talks about academic excellence. It says that students who attend Adventist institutions, secondary school, have a greater chance of pursuing tertiary education, etc. I was kind of surprised at, finding those things on ChatGPT. Now, our research does prove that, but it is good to have backup from the secular environment. So with all of that, how have we done over the years? we are celebrating 90 years in Antigua. How have we done? We have primary schools. We have an early childhood center. Recently established, New Bethel Academy. I believe you're celebrating your 20th year this year. Time does fly. I remember when that institution started. But how have we done over the years? So who wants to begin? We're going to have to go quickly because our time is short. Mrs. Patrick.
Yes. Over the years, we were able to help children to see the benefits of not just the educational program, but also benefits of physical and spiritual development that prepares them to function meaningfully in this world. And also, we have been able to expose them to skills that they can take up later on in life.
Mm-hmm. All right, wonderful. Sister Daley, you're at the preschool. This is early childhood, so we can boast of CXC results and that kind of thing. But how have our students done, and what do I expect when I send my children to the Early Childhood Center?
Okay, so let me start with how our children perform. And I must say that I was very proud today to see Mr. Jordan West carrying the torch, because he began his education at the Seventh-day Adventist Early Childhood Development Center. When he graduated as valedictorian of his class. And I am so proud of him. And we have others who would have excelled.
Let's get that, because let somebody listening thinking preschool valedictorian. So you're talking about when?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
and he went to primary
went on
school
to Seventh-day Adventist primary school.
and excelled.
And he excelled. He was valedictorian as well when he graduated from the primary school, and also number 6 in the island in the national assessment, or what we call common entrance. Yeah. Yes, he was in a place number 6. So we are indeed proud of our product.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, let's go to the secondary school now.
Oh boy, where do I begin? What I can say is that, over the years, we have seen our children excelling. Just last week, I'll start there. Just last week, when we watched the CSEC Awards, the National CSEC Awards, and we saw quite a number of our students being honored because of the hard work that they have done. It really gives us the satisfaction. Sometimes persons will say, and I'm saying this and appealing to persons at the same time. Sometimes persons will say, teaching, there's no money in teaching and education. They don't see the benefits. It might not have financial gain, but when you see your young people who we have worked with throughout the years and you see them excelling, that is enough satisfaction, because we see how God has used them and we see how God has worked through these individuals to become great men and women in our societies. And so we have spoken about the CSEC, the national awards, but I also want to speak specifically to the results, because the results are exceptionally well. And again, I want to break the perception that our school does not perform. Our school performs academically. We really do. As a matter of fact, as I said this morning, within the last 10 years, and even beyond that, I'm just using that, as most recent data, but within the last 10 years, our school has never fallen below the 82% mark at CXC at all. And that is a tremendous success.
So let me make sure I hear you correctly. You're saying, and you're using 10 years just as a point of reference.
Right.
Yeah, because current data is important. We don't want to go back too far historically. And you're saying within the last 10 years, we have never fallen below an 82% pass rate.
Never below 82% pass rate.
That's really outstanding. There are schools that have never reached 82%.
I know.
Right? So.
And then, when you take into perspective, even the science subjects, sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, those are difficult areas. And our children excel in those areas. We have children passing 100% pass rate in physics for the last 8, 9 years. That's excellent work. It means that they are doing well. And the perception is that the other schools are doing better. It's not true. It's not true. We're very much on par with the other schools. And I want to say this is not only about the academics, but I just want to highlight the fact that we are doing well academically. But as Seventh-day Adventists, it's more than academics for us. It's about the whole development of the child. It's about the Christian experience, the commitment to God, the preparing the child for eternity, the head, heart, and hand. That's what we're all about. And that is what we hope that persons can understand, that when you invest in Christian education, when you invest in Seventh-day Adventist Christian education, you are preparing your boys and girls for heaven.
And Dr. Greene, also when you mentioned the question about how our schools are doing, just recently, the police officer, Jeremiah Clark, who was commended for being calm during an arrest, he made the news. He got his foundation from the New Bethel Academy, right? So he was able to be calm while arresting an individual, and the person was very abusive towards him.
So we're talking about foundational principles that, really show and test character. Now that is really outstanding. I'm going to get to the university in one moment, but I want to go to Mr. Nicholas with a specific question. Mr. Nicholas, this question just popped into my mind, and I'm going to ask you. I have come across a few parents. Some, honestly, regrettably, have said to me, I regret having not sent on my child. My child went to the Antigua Seventh Adventist Primary School, and they passed well in the common entrance, and I sent them to this school and that school. I'm not going to call the name of any school here. But, and have said to me, now I regret. I've had calls from parents, can you pray for my child because of the outcome, etc. So here's my question. What would you want to say to parents who, after graduating from the Antigua Primary School, or the New Bethel Academy, they're saying, okay, my child has a good pass in the common entrance, what do we call it now, test of standards, national assessment, and they pass in the top 100, and I'm going to send them to this prestige school. What's your counsel to such parents?
Well, my counsel will be very simple. You're making a mistake. The fact is that if our students, and they do well in primary school, going on to secondary school is always to the advantage. Why? The atmosphere, the nurturing, the dedication of the teachers in the secondary school to see them through, to ensure that they're successful in whatever subject areas they choose, is almost guaranteed. And all they have to do is to cooperate with those teachers, and they will get the success. One of the things that I've seen over the years, and I did spend some time in the secondary school there too, even the students who might be written off as not being able to pass any subjects, having gotten that chance at the Antigua Seventh-day Adventist School, they do well, they pass. And we know, and their parents know, if they were in the government school or anywhere else, they would have been thrust out as failures, and they would not have achieved anything. But I have, and I can testify to the fact that I've seen students who might be considered weak, having gone through the Seventh-day Adventist system, come out in shining colors. One, they believe that God can help them, because we stress that. And having given themselves over to God, God can use them. And he uses them to be successful, not just in the academics, but some have even gone on to become ministers and servants of God in society. And this is what we want to see. Again, Mrs. Gore mentioned the fact that we're not just preparing the children for life here now, right, but also for eternity. And the stories, we can give examples over and over of many who have passed through this, and we have seen how God has worked with them and caused them to get good success.
I was in conversation with somebody not long ago, and they told me that some students who haven't gone to the Adventist educational system in the primary division and then went to the government secondary school, that they came back and said, listen, we can't fit in, you know, the environment is different. But that's for another day. I want to go to Mrs. Gore. Mrs. Gore, the University of the Southern Caribbean, I think back then when we established the site here, it was still CUC, back in 2007. So that's a while back. How have we been contributing to the nation? Why should I choose USC and not UWI, for example?
Thank you for the question, but before I answer you, I was so happy to hear all these great achievements, but with caution, I will say, let us not forget the bigger picture of Christian education. If we forget, those children will become the devil's tools. So let's make sure we always remember that we are making boys and girls for the kingdom, and let nothing, no stakeholders, no president, sorry, Mr. President, but even that the devil is used sometimes. Don't let anything disturb you from doing what you have to do with God's children. So now, Mr. President, I'll answer your question. Yes, in 2007, and there were 5 of us as lecturers. There's 5 of us who began this thing. So you want to know what has happened. I got the job to be the coordinator in 2015. Mr. President, when I called a meeting, 2 students showed up. And I was like, what am I going to do with 2 students? So I called the president, who called me and asked me to be coordinator. And I said, what do you want me to coordinate, 2 students? And he said, okay, go, I will work with you. What can we do? We came to the ministry, and they told us they were offering a special ed diploma. And then the minister then said, can you guys put up together a STEM program, a special ed program? And so after much back and forth, we were able to graduate. 50 teachers were accepted into the program, but only 48 of them graduated. Then in 2017, I went to the home economics lady, Ms. Gomes, and I asked her for teachers if we could upgrade them. And she got me 23 of the teachers, home economics teachers. So 2 years after, we had them do a bachelor's in family and consumer science. Then the year after, I had 10 special need teachers from private schools.
Just to interrupt, we're talking about government teachers.
Government teachers,
yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But the 10 after came from private schools, the Catholic school. And
okay.
Yeah. And then, so that went. But we still have education going along. And I think the purpose you started that school has not even been met. And I'm so happy I'm on this program, because I'm sure the purpose you started this USC thing is to make sure that all our teachers are trained. And I think we need to get to the bottom of it and make sure all our teachers are trained so they can deliver Christian education. So presently, we have scholarships for nutritionists and dietitians. We have 10 of them, and the government is paying for them. And the government is also paying for social workers. We've had 12 of them graduate, and we have 10 more. And for now, we have education students, but nobody's giving them scholarships, so they're hanging along. And presently, online, people can do the degrees online. They don't have to come to class. We have special education, family consumer science, nursing, RN to BS, early childhood education, criminology, and criminal justice. All of that.
You're going a little fast, and I want to slow down a little bit, because you just said nursing, RN to BS. So nurses who are listening, RNs, and they want to upgrade to the bachelor's, they can check you.
Right, because we actually have one at the moment. We have about 4 special need teachers, that's not Adventist teachers, They are in the government schools and they are doing the special ed. We have 2 early childhood educators. The criminology and criminal justice, I have not been able to get the police for that yet.
Well, you know, I was in Trinidad was it this year or last year? And I met a young man. He's doing a master's in I believe it's national security. And he told me that he's from the Antigua and Barbuda Defense Force. And I did ask him, how did you hear about the program? And he said his commanding officer told him about the program. And he is at the main campus in Trinidad doing the master's in national security. So there is opportunity there. Very interesting indeed.
Yes, and the lady from Barbuda also got her master's in the same thing. Right here. Well, she did it online, yeah.
Now, one other question quickly here. So if children are graduating, this weekend coming is going to be the graduation of the high school. What are the prospects for children leaving high school and the campus here?
Thank you. That's a beautiful question. Children leaving high school. Some of them are not ready to go on to the main campus. Some of them are still young. Some of them are not 18. And we can accommodate them for 2 years. They can do the general eds here and then move on to finish their degree in Trinidad. That is a brilliant idea for children. And it saves you a lot of money. You're still there. You are watching them. You are mentoring them. Because to just transition from secondary school to high school on your own, no, mommy not there, daddy not there, you just do what you want, and that is one of the reasons I think Antigua satellite site was formed, and I think we are not using it wisely. We send our children to university and they just do what they want. So that is a brilliant idea. Parents can come in, and if you want to do 1 year, 2 years, special ed. They do all the special ed courses, general ed courses, and then when they finish, they go up.
Now, again, if you're just joining us, we are talking with a panel this afternoon. We're talking about Adventist education with a focus on Antigua Barbuda because this year, this school year that is now ending marked the 90th year of Adventist education in Antigua Barbuda. And I mentioned earlier that we still have one of those very first students. His name is Abel Morris. I don't know whether our technicians are able to put his photo up. Abel Morris. He indicated, now of course, if he started in 1934, that's 90 years ago. I believe back then we started school, he would have been at least 5 years old, but chances are older than that because we were of the opinion, that strong emphasis on not sending your children to school too early. So he would be at least 95, at least, right? He is not able to be here in person, but you can see him there. Now, he said that his family chose the Seventh Adventist school because they believed that a good Christian education would help him shape into a well-rounded individual. And he spoke about his favorite teacher, who was some Miss Braithwaite. I don't know who that is, or Brathwaite. He indicated that he learned values at the Seventh Adventist school that influenced his career. He was a health inspector, and he was just very happy that he had the opportunity to have had a Christian education. Right? Now, in our closing moments, let's talk about some of the luminaries, some individuals, notable individuals who have passed through our Adventist education system. Who wants to begin? Okay, it looks like Miss Patrick is taking the mic.
Okay, passing through the New Bethel Academy, we had students like Amari Brown. He was featured this morning. He's a teacher at SNR Academy. And we have also Daniel Blucher, who is a finance officer at Caribbean Union Bank. He also passed through New Bethel Academy. And we have many more who are who are in universities at this time. We also had your son who passed through our school, Gavin Greene, who is now a medical doctor. So we have those who have passed through who were influenced by the education that they receive at our school.
Very well, very well. Mr. Joseph, from a historical perspective, can you identify anybody else who may have benefited from Adventist education and have made significant contributions to the nation?
Well, the first person that will come to mind is Dr. Bell. Dr. Bell was an outstanding scholar at the Seventh Adventist School from primary all the way up to secondary. Oh, Jarvis, not Bell. Thank you very much, Mr. Nicholas. And she was not just an outstanding Seventh Adventist scholar, but an outstanding national scholar to this day. And she can carry the torch for any educational institution.
So this notion, and again, anybody can respond, this notion that, you know, if I give my child a Seventh Adventist education, my child is being robbed of something. So that's really fallacy.
That's the devil's plan, sir. Because even with USC, most of our teachers were upgraded. So they came in as teachers, and now they're principals, they're this, they're that. They have moved on, and they're not Seventh-day Adventists. So, and they're doing very well in the system, in the government system.
You have featured already Mr. Jarvis at the Inland Revenue, but we also have folks like Lisa West, right, who is a known lawyer. She went through the system. I remember as a student at the Seventh Adventist School. So we have significant others in other areas as well that have made and are making significant contributions here in Antigua.
Okay, so Mr. Joseph has the mic in his hand.
No, what I want to say, I'm not a product of Seventh-day Adventist education except in the home, because that's where Seventh-day Adventist education begins. And it was my wife's, even though she didn't grow up in the church, she attended the Seventh-day Adventist school, and it was her wish that our child would have been a scholar at the Seventh-day Adventist school. But I mean, when she went, she came and she called me and she was crying on the phone. She did not have that opportunity. I'm not going to get into that history. But I would say that there is no educational system that is superior to a Christian education. And the Seventh-day Adventist education should be superior and is superior to any other Christian education that you can get. I will say this with respect to my own child. I always say that I would never send my child to a different philosophy from my mother, to a government school. Understanding the culture of the government school.
Well, you're a former Minister of Education, right? So be careful what you say now. Okay.
Yes, and I say that without apologies. I mean, I understand the culture of the government school, and I even. And my daughter passed exceedingly high to go to Antigua Girls High School. I think she ranked 18 that year. But I would have never, because you can get so much more out of a non-government school because of a lot of things. But when you must understand that Christian education really begins in the home. That is where your education begins, and that is the philosophy of Seventh-day Adventist education. It begins in the home, it continues on in the school system, on the trained teachers who are Christian, teaching Christian values, setting Christian examples. And in the early days, I don't know what obtains today, but I can tell you when you listen to government ministers, going back to the 1940s, the 1950s, they prefer people who come from the Seventh-day Adventist tradition, because they come with a different set of ethics and different set of work values and so forth.
Now our time is just about up, so I'm going to ask our principals and coordinators here just to tell folks who may be listening, a lot of folks are listening in Second Advent, how can they get their children into the school? Starting with Mrs. Daley, I think there are lots of children out there. You have the Early Childhood Center. I understand it's from 0 to 4 or 4 plus. Tell us, and how can a parent get their children into the Early Childhood Center?
Okay, so our center, we have a daycare and we have a preschool. As Dr. Greene rightly said, that our age range from 0 to 4 plus. Now, why I am appealing to you to send your boys and girls to us? One, at our center, our students, they are developed holistically. Now, as mentioned about our fundamental belief, we do start that at the Early Childhood Center. So from very young, we integrate our faith and learning with these boys and girls. And I'm telling you, I know parents, we want our boys and girls to excel academically, but also they must excel spiritually, meaning that at the end of life's journey, that they should make heaven their home. So we go beyond, and we integrate faith and learning, where we introduce our fundamental beliefs. They are also taught how to exhibit the fruit of the Spirit throughout their daily routine and even in community outreach, and also to believe in the promises that God has made to each one of them. So all these that we would have taught our boys and girls and are continuing to teach them. They're learning their social graces, how to resolve conflict. We have our swimming class. Yes, they start swimming from an early age. So it's not just about academics with us. They're also learning other values that is equally important as the academics.
Got application forms, did you?
I'm so passionate about getting them in. Yes.
Okay.
So at the school, we have registration forms, and even at the South Leeward Conference, and you can come in any day, or you can even call us. Our number is 562-8736. That's 562-8736, and that's between school hours. So you call us between 7:15 and 5 p.m. You get us on that number. Outside of that number, you can call 722-2701. 722-2701, and we'll be more than happy to assist you.
Okay, I'm going to have to limit the rest. Tell us very quickly, how can students, parents get their children into your school, the application forms?
Okay, at the new Bethel Academy, you can pick up your forms at the school, or at the South Leeward Conference. You can also call 562-7218, 562-7218, or 464-0046, 464-0046, and we will be happy to attend to you.
Mr. Nicholas?
Yes, application forms can be obtained from the office at the school, and a call could be made as well, 562-7211, and you can make arrangement to have your children registered with us. And we are open for the rest of the week, so you can call or come in and visit and collect your forms.
Mrs. Edwards?
Application forms are available. Come into the school, call us. Application forms can be had at the school or at a conference, like Mrs. Thing said. And you can call us 462-4120, 462-4120, or 723-1938.
Now, a little earlier, I asked about notable individuals who graduated from the school. I didn't hear anybody say Susana Gore and Susana Gore. These are doctors, medical doctors. I believe their parent is here in the person of Mrs. Gore. Mrs. Gore, you're going to tell us how they can get application forms, but tell us about your children. I believe you have 3 doctors who all passed through the Seventh Adventist school system.
Yes, I do, and I'm so proud of them. Suje, my son, he just completed his doctoral studies at UWI. So praise the Lord.
Amen.
After 4 years, got through that. So he should be coming home July 1. Jasonella, she is a medical doctor, but she also did a master's in sports medicine. She's doing her PhD in I don't know what. Suli is a dentist, and she's doing her master's in something else. These children love books, sir. So that's my children. Praise the Lord. And they all came through. And this is the other thing I was thinking. The values that we teach them when they are in school at the bottom, the ethics. And I'm actually seeing these are the things that are helping my children in the communities that they work. And that's why I'm so passionate about Christian education, and not just saying it, but doing it, letting it be seen in you, so children don't have to say, boy, they're a bunch of hypocrites. They will say, no, these people are for real. And they will grow up loving God because of the way we emulate ourselves and the things that we do. Okay, so you want me to tell people how they could get us? Okay, so now it's not, Mr. Pastor Grade is not only for the children, because we have grown-ups who can graduate. Jacqueline, 63, she graduated 2 weeks ago. With a bachelor's in social work.
Wonderful.
So if you're sitting here and you have a desire to do something, come and see me. 772-1758 Upper St. Mary Street. That's where we are.
Thank you so much. We took 8 minutes extra, but it was well worth it. We wrapping up now, we want you to know that Seventh Adventist Christian education is the way to go. If you have any doubts at all, the other day I was in conversation with a certain lady, and, she shared that her husband, in fact, I had him share his testimony, and he spoke about how his mother sent him to the Seventh Adventist school because he could not behave himself, and how that has transformed his life and has impacted him. Try Christian education, Adventist Christian education. It will make a big difference in your life. We are grateful. We are, to our very regular listeners, we are going to be taking a break. Next week, we have our high school graduation weekend. And so next week, also Sabbath afternoon, is the 90th anniversary march through the streets of St. John's, I believe, from the old school to the current school. And so we will not be having Let's Talk, and then we have our general conference session, so we're going to be out for that. So we probably will be back somewhere around the 3rd week in July. So those of you who are regular, you have a little extra time to get a Sabbath rest after your lunch, but we will be back towards the end of July. May God bless you until then.